Hi, I'm Philippa, Social Work England's Regional Engagement Lead for the South West of England. Welcome to This is Social Work. In this series, we're focusing on the professional standards, the 6 standards that social workers must know, understand and be able to do as part of their role. The professional standards are specialist to the social work profession and apply to social workers in all roles and settings across England. In this week's episode, we're focusing on Standard 2, establish and maintain the trust and confidence of people. To kick off the conversation, I'm joined by Matthew, Regional Engagement Lead for the North West, and Catherine, Regional Engagement Lead for the North East, as we discuss our own personal experiences of building trust and confidence in our roles as social workers. And later in the episode, Catherine is joined by National Advisory Forum member Ify and Derren, a young person with lived experience of social work. They share their own experience of establishing and building trust in social workers and how communication plays a vital role throughout their involvement. We hope you enjoy the conversation.
I'm Catherine Witt and I'm one of the Regional Engagement Leads for Social Work England. And I'm joined by my 2 colleagues today, Matthew Devlin and Philippa Geddes. For me, this standard really represents who we are and what we are as a profession. And we aren't going to look at all elements of the standard. We're going to focus on 2.4 and 2.5. And 2.4 is practice in ways that demonstrate empathy, perseverance, authority, professional confidence and capability, working with people to enable participation in discussions and decision making. And 2.5 is actively listen to understand people, use a range of appropriate communication methods to build relationships. And the reason why we've sort of picked those 2 out as being really important is linked, I think, to some of the evidence that we're getting about why concerns are being raised about social workers. So in our fitness to practice process, we are seeing that the majority of concerns that are raised with us are about communication. And I think that's replicated in many other areas of social work. If you look at serious case reviews and different parts of activity, communication is always the thing that it boils down to. So we thought it would be really helpful just to focus in on that. The other element is about involving people in decisions about their lives, and that comes up as a theme on a regular basis. I've been a children and family social worker for about 20 years, and involving children and young people in the decisions, the massive decisions that they make about their lives, is something that they will constantly reflect on and come back to you and feel on many occasions that they haven't been involved in those decisions. And it is a real skill. It is very difficult because sometimes you're making very difficult decisions about children's lives. That is not something that they want, but is about protecting them. So those are my sort of first thoughts. I'm going to go to Matthew. Matthew, your thoughts on professional standard 2?
I think for me, particularly standard 2.4, 2.5, it sits at the very top of what social work is about, and essentially is the reason why I come into the profession. I come into the profession because I enjoy building relationships with people. I enjoy communicating with people. But I think for every role that I've had in my career, so the 11 years I've been a social worker, I think the importance of building relationships, the importance of good communication, and the importance of transparent communication, I think, has sat at the very top of being positive in all those roles that I've had. And I think, and that's from being a frontline social worker, but now as a regional engagement lead, I think being able to communicate and build relationships is incredibly important. It's a skill. I think it's a skill that you develop throughout your social work training, whatever route that is. But I think it's a skill that you'll never stop developing as a social worker. And I think I've learned a lot in my role now as regional engagement lead about how to maybe build relationships on that bigger scale. I suppose previously my practice was really focused on adults and predominantly learning disability. And I think I felt I was skilled in building those relationships and using those relationships to have a positive impact on people's lives. But I think learning how to do that across an area such as the North West and with the range of stakeholders that all the regional engagement leads work with, I think is really important for us. But I just think for the sector generally and for the profession generally, building relationships just sits at the heart of everything that I've ever done in my social work career. That sounds really grand, doesn't it? But I think that is the reality. I think all the good that has come out of the things that I've done in the last 11 years has ultimately come from the relationships that I've been able to build.
Thanks, Matthew. Philippa?
Thanks, Catherine. I think I would absolutely echo what both of you have just said, really. And I think communication is absolutely at the forefront of being a social worker. And I think, it's really interesting, Catherine, that you've shared some of the themes that come out of our fitness to practice concerns, and that communication is often referred to, and poor communication in particular. And sometimes, as a social worker myself, I get really frustrated when I see evidence of poor communication. And I absolutely appreciate that the sector's under a lot of strain. COVID and the pandemic have really kind of pushed the sector and the people we work with, to the limit. But I feel really passionately that we should always be ensuring that we're doing our best to work with people, to be empathic, and to kind of ensuring that we're communicating the best we can. I think it's really important, and it's the least we can do in many ways. I think being a children's social worker, having good communication, sometimes we have to have uncomfortable conversations with people. There may be times where it's part of the Children Act is about kind of the wishes and feelings of the child, and ensuring that we work in partnership with parents. And I think it's really important. All that entails good communication. There may be times when we have to make decisions or recommendations that that families or children may not be in agreement with. But I still think you can deliver and have difficult conversations with respect and humility, and absolutely, that difficult conversation can be done. Often parents will say to me, just be honest to me. Often the amount of times we hear that families and children don't understand why they have a social worker involved in their lives. Perhaps, we listen to stories of care experienced people who don't even understand perhaps why they were even in care or what their care history is. If we can make sure we get good communication right, if people are included in discussions and decisions around their lives, and if we're making a really conscious effort to listen to people and really respond to their communication needs. We use a lot of jargon in social work and some inappropriate languages, and I just think it's really important that we work hard and go that extra mile to try and make sure that people feel as inclusive and they understand, because sometimes we can think people understand, but if we're not checking that out or really working hard to make sure they understand, or we're having that good, developing those communication skills, that's when people get upset, they get angry, and that often can lead to that level of complaints and concerns being raised with us. So I think it goes, I'd absolutely agree with both of you. It goes to the heart of social work, like you said, Catherine. And I think if we can get communication right, it's difficult, and I have to say, hands up, I haven't always got it right, and that's where the feedback, and that's where hearing the voice of people with lived experience is really important. And I'm really pleased we've got two people today who are going to be telling us about what good social work and communication, has meant to them, because hearing from those who've lived experience then makes us as practitioners, as social workers, be better and improve. And and it goes into sort of the work of Social Work England about that co-production element and making sure that we're listening to all people from the sector, but in particular people with lived experience of social work.
I think listening is such an important one as well, isn't it? I think it's sometimes when you're thinking about good communication, you can just think of it in terms of that one-way thing, but I think that the listening bit's incredibly important. I've always felt really privileged to sit in people's living rooms and listen to them, talking about them, their struggles and their difficulties and their challenges, and then working with those individuals to support them to make some of them changes. But I think you're right. I think our roles now as regional engagement leads, it's important for us to listen to the sector. And again, I feel incredibly privileged to get that opportunity to listen to the sector, to listen to social workers, take that insight back in, and for us to have those discussions within the organisation to hear what's happening in the sector. And I think that's listening for us now is really important, isn't it? And I think it's really important for the organisation as well.
I think communication can come in very different forms, and just listening to people or being with them and being present with them. And sometimes I think we get too bogged down in talking, and being, as I say, being present is sometimes all you need to be. So understanding communication in all its forms and guises, and the right thing at the right time. And I think as social workers, sometimes we get a wee bit frenetic about the talking and the problem solving, but good communication lets people go at their own pace and to really take control, because we aren't going to be involved in their lives forever, and giving those people the support to be able to work on their own issues and solve some of their own problems is really, really important. Well, I think that's a really good point to bring Ify and Derren in to talk about their views as people who've had social workers in their lives. And we're really grateful for them to spare the time and to join us to give us their views. I'm really delighted to introduce two really interesting people that have agreed to join us on this podcast today. So I'm going to start with Derren. Do you want to introduce yourself, Derren, and just tell us how social workers have been involved in your life?
Hello, I'm Derren Hamowa. I'm in a residential children's home, and so that's where social workers are involved in my life.
And how long have they been involved in your life, Derren?
Pretty much all my life, but not for the same reasons each time. So now it's obviously more to do with the fact that Section 20 on a voluntary order and care.
Brilliant. That's great. So we'll maybe get to ask you a few more questions about that, just so that people know, if you don't mind saying what age you are.
I'm 17.
17. That's brilliant. Okay, Ify, do you want to tell us who you are and how social workers have been involved in your life?
Well then, my name is Ify Wakoro. I was born and raised in Nigeria, moved to the UK. This is just over a decade ago, and I was involved in a car accident in 2010 that left me paralyzed and spinal cord injury, and that's really the first time I got involved with social workers. It was in the hospital, and pretty much since then. So pretty much all my social work needs have come from that perspective, that medical spinal cord injury disability side of things.
That's brilliant. So thanks for that, both of you. So today we're going to talk about Standard 2. And Standard 2 for social workers is the importance of social workers establishing and maintaining the trust and confidence of people. And I think it's one of the most important standards for a social worker, because it tells them how to be a social worker and how they should behave. So I'm going to ask you both a bit about that and a bit about your experience of social workers that have worked directly with you. And I'll start this time with Ify. My question to you, Ify, is what has your experience been of being able to establish and build trust with your social workers, if you have been able to do that?
Well, so I haven't had social workers involved with me right through the whole process, right through the decade I've had this disability. But every time they've had to step in, were situations where I was in a vulnerable position. So straight off the bat, the need for establishing trust and making me feel sort of safe in their hands was pretty crucial. I'd say the first time when I was in hospital, it came more from sort of not putting too much pressure on me. The social worker let herself known, let herself be known by me, and let me know where to find her, that sort of thing. And she'd pop in just to check it, how I'm doing. Maybe sometimes have a cup of tea with me, that kind of thing. And I got to know her as a person first. I was lucky to be in that position, being in hospital with her where she was based. So by the time we actually started getting to the brass tacks of the technical side of things and what I needed, post admission, which is really where the social work intervention came in. I was already comfortable with her, and it was made very clear from the start that it was a case of she was there to help me not get to a point where I didn't need her anymore, which I respected quite a lot. Because that's almost like saying my job is to make sure that my job becomes obsolete, that sort of thing. So it just made it feel more genuine that this person actually was there, like, for my needs. And ever since then, I've been a lot more open-minded with social workers since then, but it's sort of been the same thing where I've been in a vulnerable situation and then they've sort of like had a discussion with me, had a chat with me on an informal basis and established who we were as people first before getting into the actual work. And yeah, that's how getting that trust has worked for me, really.
That's amazing, yeah. And hearing that sort of whole side of just building that relationship is so important, particularly in your position where it was a catastrophic event in your life, and relationship are really important at that stage. So thanks for that, Ify. So Derren, what about you? Have you been able to sort of have a social worker that you've built a good relationship with and that you've trusted?
A bit of both ways, because like my social worker I've got now couldn't fault her, but like I just couldn't, like, she's been good at building relationships. She does try and keep in contact. I don't always make it easy. But in the past, I wouldn't ever say it's anything social workers did. I wouldn't say any of my past social workers, other than there was one I worked with, but I was working with two at the same time, a student, and the student was really good at building a relationship and maintaining trust. But like I'd say, it wasn't as much the social workers, it was that didn't make that aspect easy. I avoided conversations, and my mum would tell me, "Oh, your social worker's coming," and I'd just not be at the house all day and just avoid them.
And why was that? Was it about them, or was it about the fact that they were a social worker?
Wasn't them being a social worker. It wasn't even them doing anything wrong either. It was just their personality didn't work for me. Like, I have to quit.
That's absolutely, understandable. Especially when you're young, it really matters, doesn't it, that you get on with the person that's working with you. Okay, so another question I'm going to ask you both is about part of that's the standard is about being really part of decision making and you feeling that you're in control of what happens to you. And I think social workers get criticised quite a lot that they don't involve people enough, particularly young people, and sometimes decisions are taken where young people or anybody really isn't fully involved in that decision. So just from your point of view, we'll go to Ify again. Have you felt involved in decision making, and have social workers made that easy for you? Have they included you in big decisions in your life?
Yeah, so I've been quite hands-on with like living with disability from the start. I did definitely have to be pushed in that direction at the start because I didn't know what life was going to be like out in the community and actually having to live with disability outside of a controlled hospital environment. But yeah, the social workers and all the medical staff, in fact, in the hospital, made it a point of duty to encourage my independence, to direct my own care, have a say in decisions that were being made, and it wasn't even a case of they were just telling me that I needed to do these things. When they started making some of those decisions, they tried to make sure as much possible that I was involved. So one of the big things social workers helped me do was transition back into university. I knew I wanted to go back into university straight after discharge as quickly as possible. But there were a lot of like technicalities in getting that like sorted out. So there were a few meetings with different groups of people involved with the process, and as much as possible, the social worker would always like invite me to the meetings, make sure that they were on the day I was available. If there was any reason I couldn't make a meeting, was possibly down to my health or something that was out of my control, but making it possible for me to always be able to attend those meetings if I wanted to. And then thank goodness I did, because there were definitely some things that if I didn't get a say in how they panned out, things would have turned out unfavorably. And I got to give my 2 cents on how I thought things should go forward. I got to learn why things had to be a certain way, or could or couldn't be, how I wanted them, and make better informed decisions going forward. So yeah, I was definitely encouraged to take part in the decisions around my life at the time, and I'm ever grateful for that, really.
That's brilliant. Was there any decision that was taken without your involvement?
No. So there were decisions that went different ways from what I wanted. There were different decisions that I wasn't happy with, but there was a good effort made to help me understand why. I mean, even at the time, there were some things that I wasn't happy with, or I wasn't happy with the explanations I was given. When they say hindsight is 20/20, but looking back now, I can see where they were coming from, and even though there's some things I feel they could have still done a bit differently, but at the time, so they didn't have the insights I have now, like 10 years later. So in hindsight, it went a lot better than I thought it did. But none of those decisions were down to just outrightly making them be made for me. It was always a case of this couldn't happen because XYZ is in place, that sort of thing. There was always an explanation whether I was happy with it or not, but at least I wasn't being left out of those decisions.
Yeah, you were really included.
Yeah.
So Derren, what about you? Have you felt included in all the decisions made about you in your life?
Yeah, I've always felt pretty included, but obviously I also look at it, and even like sometimes I won't weigh up all the pros and cons. So when there is a decision getting made, I'm usually there. I'm probably the one who puts the least amount of thought into a decision. So although it would be pretty easy for them to make a decision without me, they've always included me in like decisions that are going to impact anything. At the end of the day, or at least my social worker, I don't know about everyone's, but just want to do what's best for the young people they work with.
That's great. How many social workers have you had in your life?
About 6.
6. So that's quite a lot. Ify, how many social workers have you got to know?
Gotten to know 2. Yeah, just the 2. I've probably worked with one other passively. Yeah, I've only really worked with 2 social workers.
Both really good place to make your observations about your own experience of that. If you had to sort of choose, would you want social work contact in person, or is it quite okay over technology? Using technology.
I can think of situations where I'd prefer to have it in person, but in my head, those tend to be more crisis situations, or situations that tend to be a lot more sensitive. But this is just my imagination. Thankfully, I've not had to deal with any sort of negative situations like that. There might be other situations I can't think of, but as it stands, I'm quite happy just doing things over the phone. I'm comfortable with things going virtual, video chats, and all that, and it's more a case of I'm comfortable with what they're with, what they are comfortable with. So yeah, I wouldn't put a preference on either. Again, as I said, it's not really been tested. The need to diversify the ways I communicate with them. So I'm good at whatever at the moment.
I actually prefer the ringing. I also think sometimes it is nice to see each other. So I think mostly, especially now with me and my social worker, it's as and when, like I was speaking to her in my lunch break today, like we don't really arrange calls or stuff. Or if she wants to see me, we struggle to see each other on weekdays anyway because I've got work. So she'll say, I'm free this Saturday, like 2 days before. Are you at your mum and dad's? Because she's based near my mum and dad. And we'll arrange to see each other that way. So it's more casual rather than making it like setting up meetings and stuff. It can sometimes be a bit too much. Like,
Derren, can I ask you a question about you being in there, like they looked after of you when people are talking about you and communicating across the sort of table? How does that feel?
all right, you're always in it, and everyone speaks to you quite respectfully. It's just about most of it's about everyone finding out what you want and what's going to benefit you and what needs to happen. It's just small stuff like medicals. They can talk about when you want to move out, all that type of stuff. So none of it's bad, and everyone there makes you feel comfortable.
That's great. Thanks, Derren. So I've got another one question to ask, but before we do that, I'm going to put you on the spot and say, you two don't know each other. Is there anything you want to ask each other?
One thing that does come to mind anytime I come into contact with anyone who's had social work intervention from a young age. Like I was 20 when I had the accident, and I always used to think, "Oh wow, that was really young." But then meet people like you who've obviously had that from much younger. I'll say, how do you think you're finding transition from say childhood to teenagers, and how do you think it's going to go going forward with social workers?
There's actually a plan put in place for this. I'm working with someone called a leaving care worker, and she'll completely take over my social worker as soon as I turn 18. And so I'll work with her up until I'm 25, and then after that I'll practically just live obviously like any other adult would.
Are you looking forward to that? Are you nervous at all?
I've not really thought about it, obviously. That's quite a while away. I'm my social worker I work with now. Like I only started working with her when I had moved to the local area. So around the same time I got my social worker, a couple of months after, I had my leaving care worker working with me anyway. So I've got a good relationship with both of them.
Oh, that's brilliant.
That's great. So you feel quite confident about the future.
Yeah.
So, the last question, and I want you to sort of think about this one. We really want social workers to be the best they possibly can, and we want to support them in that. But if there was 3 things that you thought was important for a social worker to know or be skilled at, what would those 3 things be and why? Ify, will I put you on the spot first?
Yeah, I'll go first. Okay. So first thing I'd say is probably patience. Being patient not just with the service user, but also with the situation as a whole. As a lot of people would know, they don't tend to be very easy or straightforward. Also being patient with themselves, and not piling that pressure on too much if things aren't say going the right way. Well, yeah, patience is a big deal for me. With regards to anyone who I'm in their care. Second thing I'd say is probably self-care. That's probably like my top one for social workers. Just the better frame of mind my social worker is, the better service they can provide me. So from an individualistic point of view, from selfish point of view, like I'll get a better service if they are well taken care of. But also from their point of view, they'll be able to do a better job and come out of it a lot more satisfied and a lot more fulfilled from doing their job.
Derren, the most important thing for social workers?
I'd probably say managing the time pretty well, in terms of, although you have your working hours, like my social worker now says to a boss, like, has a conversation with a boss, and she's like, I understand that these are my working hours, but Derren wants to schedule in a conversation, but can't talk on it in my working hours because he's at work himself. So can I take a few hours off one of the days and put them onto the Saturday and go out and see Derren? So like managing a time there, it benefits not even just young people, the people they're working with, because not everyone can do every time.
Brilliant. So fitting into your lifestyle as much as, not 9 to 5 sort of thing, really important.
Yeah.
Any other important things, features of a social worker?
I can't say I've seen it a lot, but I think a social worker should be straightforward. I think that it's better to get the point across and potentially upset the person you're working with than tiptoe around it and then still end up with the same outcome.
Be honest and straightforward. Yeah.
And then I'd probably also say, let the person you're working with kind of take the lead. It's more like if I was talking to my social worker and she was constantly butting into every last sentence, I'd probably get fed up and I'd just leave it and be like, so need to be able to listen as well.
Brilliant one. That's fantastic. So Ify.
The third one that came to mind was being open-minded about what you could face out there. And when we hear the words open-minded, usually we think maybe to someone whom you may not agree with on a fundamental level, whether it's their beliefs or their actions that they've taken. But much of that is important, and not trying to take anything away from that type of open-mindedness. Also thinking of things like Derren said, having a client who may not be able to fit in the times that you're working hours, being open-minded to think outside the box and, being open-minded to different situations that a social worker may find themselves in, not necessarily something to do with the clients, but more with their environment, something to do with the people around them, their family, that sort of thing. And it's not a case of just sticking completely by the book. That makes it sound like I'm saying they should break rules. But no, this shouldn't be too rigid with their approach to their clients. And every situation is different. Every case is different. Every service user is different. So they're just being open-minded to, things possibly not being how you may think they are when you first take on a case.
Oh, that was a really insightful discussion, Ify and Derren. Thanks ever so much. Really positive response in terms of, just your views about social work, and that's really great to hear. It's not always the case, and we promise we didn't give them the script, but it was really good to hear that, and I think lots of food for thought as well. Certainly one of my moments during that conversation was from you, Ify, where you said that the most important thing you thought a social worker needed to have was patience. And I have to say, I was a little bit taken aback. I was thinking of all sorts of things, but patience wasn't a word that necessarily jumped into my head. But I've thought about that, just during this few minutes, and I think it is really, really important. I do see the importance, and patience is such a hard thing to have as a social worker. We're expecting families and people to change and do things very quickly at our pace, but actually that isn't how we achieve sustainable change. And we've got to let people, go at their pace. And there is something as well about organisationally, we're under a lot of pressure to close things and get things done. So being professionally patient is hard in the context that we're working. But for me, it's about having that inner patience and to really offer to people, the opportunity to work on their own lives and for them to take that on when social work isn't present in their lives. So there is, it has been really insightful to use the word patience. And it's maybe not something, as I say, that social workers are necessarily well trained at or good at. But I'm certainly going to think about it from my own perspective. So thanks for that. So, Philippa, any top tips or anything that sort of struck you making this podcast?
Thanks, Catherine. I think there's lots of things really in terms of top tips. I could probably reel off a list, but trying to think what's really pertinent. I think you really touched on it before we at the beginning when you talked about, and I think Matthew, you said it as well, about the value of listening. And I think it's about looking that communication comes in many forms. And I think really being reminded of that and thinking about those different ways we can communicate with people. And sometimes, just being and spending time with people and not always going in with an agenda. I think often in statutory social work, there always needs to be an aim of purpose of the visit or the meeting, but actually if we're talking about building relationships, some of that's being, spending time with people. Some of the best conversations I've had with young people have been when we've been driving somewhere or when we're just walking out of a meeting, do you know what I mean? Or where, I'm going to take, I'm taking them somewhere, taking them to, to have family time or to see, to meet someone new. So I think it's about just remembering that the value of communication can come in many different forms. And just to also always think about maybe sometimes be the social worker you would want to have, and think about how that is received, because I think that's really important.
I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I'm going to talk about listening as well. And I talked about this on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, and it was something that my very first practice educator said to me, and this was 14 years ago now, and it has stuck with us. And she was a brilliant social worker, and she said very early on in my placements, this was my first 70-day placement, it was my first big placement, but she said very early on, learn how to listen to people. And that has stuck with me for the last 14 years, and I probably didn't understand it at that point. I didn't understand the importance. I didn't really understand what she truly meant, and there was probably lots of other information that was being given to us at that stage, and I was a bit overwhelmed by everything first placement. But I think that building that skill, I think, was so important. And I think in that placement was with older adults, which was a completely new area for me to enter into. And it was ultimately the area of social work that I went into when I first qualified. And that has stuck with us in every role that I've had, learning how to listen to people, whoever that individual is and whatever their circumstances are, and whatever circumstance you're meeting them in. I think just listening to them, spending that time, truly listening as well, is a skill to develop, and I think is sometimes overlooked. But I think for me that remains a really important part of my professional life, but my personal life as well. Do you know what I mean? Listening to my children, listening to my wife, all those things are really important. So it's certainly stuck with us and had a really profound impact, I think, on me as an individual and me as a social worker. And I think that has to be my number one, because it certainly had the biggest impact on me as a person.
That's great, Matthew. And actually, when both of you were talking, the patience bit filtered in again, and actually we can't expect that good communication to happen immediately. We've got to work at it, we've got to develop it, and we've got to make it right for the people that we're working with. And I suppose the thing I probably would like to end on, and it was something actually that sort of resonated with me, I think quite early on in my career, was relationships change lives. Without a relationship, you ain't going to do very much social work. And sometimes that will take time, and sometimes you think it's time you haven't got. But without it, you aren't going to affect any meaningful change. And that's what social work is.
Thanks again to Ify and Derren for joining us today and sharing their personal experiences of social work so openly, as well as Matthew and Catherine for adding their own perspectives. If you enjoyed the discussion and would like to continue the conversation with us, you can follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn using the hashtag ThisIsSocialWorkPod to share your thoughts. You can also find out more about the professional standards on our website. Join us for our next episode, where we'll be talking about Standard 3 and what it means to be accountable for the quality of your practice and the decisions you make as a social worker.